Today we have a visitor, but who have been in my life actually for some years. I met Nora for the first time in, I think it was 2011, right after you published your movie or film about your father. A small, if you haven't seen it, a small movie, it is also up there, that I still use in my teaching at Aalborg University, small bits and pieces that helps us come into the thinking of your father's thinking. Yesterday evening I was thinking about how do I actually, how do I introduce Nora Bateson without putting her in a box. Is she a filmmaker? Are you a somaticist? Maybe we'll know today. Are you a warm data lab facilitator? Whatever. But you are here, and that's the most important. And then I think we all will become what is necessary today to become, to have a relatively hot afternoon.
Very warm data.
Yeah.
Living systems work in relationship and communication. And if you start improving the parts in a culture and you start to embrace this improvement of parts as being a premise upon which the culture is centered, you're going to find yourself in a whole lot of trouble fast. So William tried desperately to warn people about this, and he failed totally. But what he saw coming was fascism, and he said, it's not long, if you do this, it's not long before one grouping of people is going to think that they are more perfect than the others. And they're going to start trying to figure out a way to exclude or to fix or to adjust or to define those measurements of normality, okay, that would also define the measurements of abnormality. Okay, this is very important because the focus was on the individual and how to fix the parts. So, this is happening around the same time that statistics is made, okay? Every single early statistician was a eugenicist. Every single early statistician was a eugenicist. Please think about that for a minute and how much we use statistics in our daily lives and what the roots and the deep motions of that perception, where they came from. This was when industry was really placing itself in culture. Okay, we're in this moment, in 2022, we're looking around going, how do we make systems change? How do we make systems change? Well, I gotta tell you something. In that moment, we had systems change. And every single system changed. The school systems, the health systems, the political systems, the banking, the word economics came to be. Statistics came to be. The idea that you could optimize, you could make it more efficient, you could get from here to there, faster, better, cheaper. That this was a thread that it scooped into the culture everywhere. And it was in direct harm of those processes that needed to wander. That when an organism changes, it changes in a pattern of wild relational mutual learning, impossible to chart, impossible to measure. So that's where William was, okay? And then my dad came along, and he went, long story, but anyway, he went to New Guinea to become an anthropologist. And he wanted to study culture for a whole lot of reasons, one of which being, I think he was always interested in the question of not just can you perceive your world, but are you perceiving your perception? Okay? So if you study other cultures or you spend time in other cultures or with people who think differently than you or with animals or in forests or with artists or whatever, you get a little bit of a rub of where your perception thought things were going and where somebody else's thought they were going, and you think, oh, well, there's one of my edges. There's my perception. Very often we don't get to perceive our perception. We think our perception is we're just perceiving the world. You are not perceiving the world. You're perceiving your perception. Right? Is it hot in here? Well, it depends on where. If you're coming in from Thailand, it might not be so hot in here. Right? If you're coming from somewhere else, it could be hot in here. What's hot? Is it hot? You're perceiving your perception. And that includes these deep patterns of cultural epistemological habits. So he went to New Guinea and he met this woman, Margaret Mead, who became a famous anthropologist too, but at the time they were kids. They were 25 years old, imagine that. And they were in New Guinea, and it was the year 1930. Now, what's happening in 1930? Fascism is rising. Okay, here it comes. Everything that William, who is now, everything William thought was going to happen starts to happen. And the United States puts in an immigration law of 1925 that says nobody can enter from Southern Europe. Only Northern Europeans can enter the United States. Okay, so eugenics was not relegated to Sweden's Uppsala scientists or Germany, or it was everywhere. It was the sweetheart of global science. It was in Asia, it was everywhere. And these kids, they start to ask this question. What do we do to stop this? How do you stop fascism? Because if you polarize with it, it digs in. And if you say nothing, it grows. So how do you meet fascism? And what they did is so beautiful. They started writing letters to all these thinkers all over the world who were also young, wild, brilliant people, Warren, McCulloch. I mean, the group that would later become the Macy's group, several members of that group start writing letters as early as 1930. And they don't know what the hell they're talking about. They are like groping in the dark. There's no language for this yet. Cybernetics hasn't happened yet. There's no words yet. And what they decide is, if what we could do is start a new kind of science that studied how the world comes together in relationship to make life, that science would surely be the antidote to the kind of thinking that produces fascism. Right? So what they decided to do was to try to get down under the, what you see with fascism is you see compartmentalization. Right? And when you get that compartmentalization, you get this objectification of a person, of a culture, of a plant, of anything. And once it's been objectified, you no longer have to perceive it in its relationships. Once it's objectified, you can exploit it and you can justify the exploitation. Once something's been objectified, it's been cut from its nest of relationships. Are you with me? And then it can be exploited, and that exploitation can be justified. So they thought if we could start a science in which what was important was to the perception of those relational processes, we could get down underneath the fascism, and that would be the way to stop it. Now, these letters are heartbreakingly earnest. They're so lovely. They're in the Library of Congress. If you ever happen to be in Washington, D.C., go see them because they are so sweet. And important because upon that foundation of these passionate kids comes later what is this fantastic body of intellectual work. The Macy conferences, complexity theory, systems theory, right? Chaos theory, all of this starts with these kids. And their hope to stop fascism. Now, it is no accident that Gregory and Margaret were in New Guinea, okay? Because they are definitely they're soaking up other ways of seeing the world. They're recognizing there's other ways of seeing, and that peoples around the world who are not seduced into the industrial mind are able to actually behave in different ways with each other, and that there's all sorts of cosmological and other ways of thinking. And so they're trying to bring this into Western science. Can we bring this in? So that's kind of how it starts. And I guess I'll let you continue. But that's the heritage that's there. And William was a character. Okay, he was offered the first chair of genetics at Cambridge University. And he turned it down because they wanted to study the chromosome theory. And he thought, well, the chromosome theory is interesting, but that's one small piece of the puzzle. A chromosome theory studies genetics as being linear, and it's not linear. It's contextual and transcontextual. So he left and started his own lab up in Norwich. And in that lab, he surrounded himself with women over 50 who had gone into biology. And they were very strident and outspoken. They were called the Snapdragons. And one of them was Darwin's granddaughter, whose name was Nora Barlow, and that's who I'm named after. But what's important there is that he left. He turned his back. He saw what was happening, and he saw that as his work went into the academy, it was getting sucked into the political, into the journalist, into the weapons manufacturing, into the whole economics that were substantiating fascism, nationalism. That were, they were using his work to justify producing arms. And he wrote the first paper in 1917 that said there's no such thing as race. That was the first one, and you better believe that paper was squelched. Nobody wanted that paper to get out. And he's credited with having the first, naming genetics, but actually I think that's more important. Anyway, the king offered him knighthood. And he wrote him back and said, no thanks. literally. He didn't even sign his name. He wrote WB. No thank you, WB. And then you see letters that he wrote to my dad at the same time, who was like 9 years old. And he signs his full name, with love, your father, William Bateson. But to the king, I can't accept this, no thank you, WB. He wanted no part of the establishment. And I want to share that with you because I have a feeling that Jacob's going to ask me what it is that I carry from that. And this is not insignificant.
And when you discovered it?
When I discovered it. Yeah, I discovered it. I went to Cambridge to go look at the archives there, and I found this little note to the King of England.
Also when you discovered the legacy.
Yeah.
Of that work in your work.
Yeah. It's a funny thing with legacy because it's there and you don't know that it's there, but once you see it, you know it was always there. And so it's hard to like put it on a timeline because the timeline is sort of overfolding. But I found this little piece of paper. It wasn't even on a full letter page, this note to the king. So, but that's not easy to do. How many of us would just say no to some honor like that comes with, land and prestige and, comfort for generations? Could you walk away from that? But he did. And I think that it speaks of a kind of character. I like to say that William was super punk rock. He was actually completely anti-establishment. Once he saw the ways in which these different institutions were folding in on each other, he wanted nothing to do with any of it. But he kept doing his research. I think that's fascinating, and I think it's important. For many years, people thought that William was the guy who got it wrong, because what he was saying, was that it was in the context and that the communication between all these organisms was taking place in something he called vibrations. Now, of course, it's been 120 years, and now we're realizing that, in fact, there is a communication between these organisms that's taking place in something like vibrations. So he took a hit. He took a hit, but he didn't compromise that. And I think I get some of my strength from there. When I get tired of lighting fires in the rain, I have that. Yeah.
Or eating sand.
Or eating sand, exactly.
We'll come back to that.
Okay.
This is some of the publishing you have been a part of, and many, many others, especially on, is it Medium?
Yeah, I have Medium, yeah.
There's a lot, if you haven't read the articles, they're there. What I'm interested in is, first of all, in this, what we're going to talk about today, warm data and so on, are kind of coming together in a parallel motion with your warm data labs and so on. But from your position, you also in the article called Eating Sand, you write about the systemic crisis that you see from where you are. Can you talk a little bit about systemic crisis and when warm data came as a concept to you, if that's the right relation to do the...
Yeah, that's going to lead us right into somathesy. Are you ready to go there?
I'm not ready.
Are you?
Yes,
I'm not ready.
But start with what is going on in the world. What is systemic crisis? What is that?
So the systemic crisis, there's a lot of different ways to think about this, okay? And so it's okay if I draw on things? So one of the things that you hear a lot about is multiple perspectives. Okay, so we have a systemic crisis in that we've got lots of different contexts that are in crisis that are actually in relationship in crisis. Okay, so if you look at it from the outside, you might get something like a bicycle wheel. And you get the education systems in crisis, the health systems in crisis, the economics are in crisis. We have a tech crisis, we have a political crisis, we have an ecological crisis, we have a crisis of the family, we have a, right? And the list goes on. But this is really not a good way to think about it. Okay, this is more linear thinking, just put in a circle. Okay, so watch out for this because it's very tempting. What you get with this is you get streams of decontextualized data from each aspect of a system coming in, but there's a huge piece of information missing here, right? And what's missing here is the relationship between these various pieces. Right? So you say, I want to fix the education system. The education system is trashed. It's my job to, I work in education, I need to deal with these systemic issues in education. And you think, well, if we had a perfect education system, it would look like that. So what we need is a strategy to get from here to there. And we'll break it down into steps. Usually it's 5. I don't know why. But the problem is that, that what's happening in education isn't in education. Right? What's happening in the education system is economic. It is cultural. It is political. It is, it's in the family. What one generation expects of the next generation. It's in science. It's in technology. And more than any of that, it's in the relationship between science and technology and the family, and how you deal with technology and science and the family, and how the political system is holding up those relationships with technology, and how that's economic, and how that worked its way into the culture. So you can put all the new curricula you want in the education system. You can put all the iPads you want to put in the 3rd grade of every country in the world, and you won't change a damn thing. Because the way in which this thing is being shaped is not in the education system. Now, the trick of this is that you could say the same for all of those. Okay? The problem with technology isn't in technology. It's economic, it's cultural, it's political, it's in the family, it's in the idea, it's in the identity, it's in, right? The problem with the health system isn't in the health system. It's in the technology, it's in the family, it's in the education system, it's in the, right? So everywhere you turn, you find that the thing you're trying to grab just leaped out of your hands. Which is why the eugenics approach, that's why I started there. This idea that you're going to fix the parts doesn't work. Because it's not in the parts. So it's in this tricky space. It's in this relational, communicational space that actually nobody's in charge of. There are no bylaws. There is no department of transcontextual epistemology that you can file a complaint to. Right? It isn't there. So where is it that we need to work? So the systemic crisis that I see is you can point to the bits and you can say, oh, we have rising depression, and oh, we have, huge loss, we have huge poverty, we have this, we have that, but those are consequences. Those are consequences. And it's really important not to get distracted into solving the consequences. Because if you keep solving consequences, you never have to deal with this, and things just get worse. So this is the systemic crisis. So it's a real puzzle. And this is why, for me, what William was doing 120 years ago is really important. So what he's talking about when he's saying, how does an organism change? He's asking the same question, which is, how does something shift in the field of relational process here? And what does it mean to participate in that? All right? Because the worst thing that can happen is that we, us, the saviors, come in and decide we know what's best for the system. Let's manipulate it into a better place. Now, does that sound familiar? So here you have the predicament. How to participate in the wilderness of systemic process without getting caught in the industrial epistemology of having a linear strategy of manipulation. Eek. It's not easy. Okay, go ahead.
I think on that note, let's take just 5 minutes talk around each table. You can fill up some water, eat some snacks, and just talk about what was interesting, or what can you recognize both in the legacy that you talked about and also in the current understanding of the different kind of crises that we actually experience in everyday life. So just 5 minutes around and we're not gonna hear you out after that, but just to get it into Danish also maybe. So please, 5 minutes.
Yeah, that looks good.
Perfect. It sounded like there was something to discuss. That's good. We'll continue now. As I told you about this small article, it's maybe 7 pages or something like that. You can get it on Medium or write to me or even to Nora. In this one you write, Nora, you write, this is not a moment to fix a machine. This is a moment to compose new cultures as a kind of answer to the current crisis, interconnected crisis that we are in. And you just, together with a fantastic group of people, published in some journal called On Psychology, a whole udgave, what is that called? En hel udgave. And whole issue on warm data. In that, I caught this quotation as one of your answers to build new cultures, I think, or you can continue on that. New words to hold the invisible world of possibility. So instead of looking into new practices that often try to fix things in the old paradigm or the more industrial paradigm, actually but also maybe that's a part of your legacy, your grandfather and father also coined new words to uncover, or whatever you call it, the possibilities that are in our world but not in our language. And some of them are warm data, sematity, and aphanipoesis. And we'll hear about them now.
Yay.
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 So please.
Yay.
And just to say that in 45 minutes we'll have a break, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and then we'll move into more like a warm data lab. So we'll go even deeper into practice in relation to try to...
So we're going to do warm data, semathacy, and aphanipoesis in 45 minutes.
Yeah, well, we'll look at each other. We'll look at each other and say...
Okay, just... Okay, then hold on to your seats.
Yes.
And luckily it's being filmed, so you can look at this
Yeah.
again. So if I go fast, you can just hit rewind.
But
not
not today.
on me, but on the machine. Okay, so I want to start with a story because I think that's the best way in. And you know, kind of what I was showing here, you know, you could freak out, actually. You could freak out with this because there's actually the question of, oh my God, what do we do? Where do we do? How do we do? How do we get paid to do it? Right? How do I continue to feed my child while doing something that's in the place where there's nothing to do? But everything must be done. Yeah.
There's also the pressure to do something.
Yeah.
We've got to do something, even if it's the wrong thing. That will at least we feel like we're being busy and getting somewhere.
And exactly. Which is not small. Because when you don't do something, you can feel useless. And that's not good for living organisms. That they don't do well with uselessness. Any organism, yeah, it's no good. It's sad. It's a not a good place to be in relationship with your world. So let's go here, because really what I'm talking about and what I'm bringing here is this world of possibility that I see as super exciting and relatively untapped, and it's just sitting right there for us. But let me tell you how I kind of found that and what happened to us. Okay, so I started this thing called the International Bateson Institute. And I started the International Bateson Institute because I was traveling around the world and I started to see that everywhere I went, you know, in each of these realms, people were coming to a place of anxious paralysis. I want to do more, but I can't do more because this is the edge of my field. This was true with family therapists. It's true with teachers. It's true with politicians. It's true with doctors. It's true with police. It's true with social workers. It's true with pretty much no matter where you go, you're going to find this sense of, I would love to do more, but I can't. I'm at the edge of my box, my role. Okay, my role. It's a problem with roles. If everybody stays in their role, what happens? Nothing. Nothing happens. So we have to get out of our roles. That's exactly what's happening when organisms are changing their relationship, right? We thought we'd start off with a research project, and we were going to begin to do trans-contextual research. And we thought we were very clever. We started off with the question, how do systems get unstuck? And that was going to be a very clever question, because everywhere we looked, we saw stuckness, and we thought this is going to be good. Well, it's not a very good question. And it's not a very good question, because if you look at any kind of systemic process and you find the stuck part, if you come out a little bit, you're going to see that there's all sorts of change taking place to keep that one place stuck. Okay? In other words, it takes a lot of change to keep something stuck. If you're only looking in an outline of a system here, you won't see the change, the wild changes at the margins that it takes to hold something still. Okay, if you want an example, just look at the economy. If you want to have a stuck level of increase of 2% or whatever it is, in order to do that, you're going to get wild fluctuations of people and natural resources and so on and so forth. To keep the economy stable takes a lot of change around the margins. To keep one member of a family in a pattern of their own alcoholism or addiction, the rest of the family is doing acrobatics socially and economically to hold that thing still. Right? It takes a lot of change to keep something still. That's interesting. So we realized we had the wrong question, so of course we pursued it, because that's what you do with research, right? So we thought about what might be the stuckest system that we could find, and the stuckest system that we could find, was actually to study the body in paralysis. I don't know if any of you have ever worked with paralysis before, but at the time I was getting these beautiful, although totally incoherent, letters from this clinic in Italy. And they were writing me, I think they were using Google Translate, they were writing me these letters. I mean, they were like poetry, but it was surrealism. I couldn't understand a thing they were saying. And it had something to do with the fact that they were using my dad's ideas to generate these therapies for people in paralysis, and that I should come see. Now, usually when I hear about people instrumentalizing this work, my general take is run, don't walk. Don't have anything, it's never a good thing. But eventually, for a series of circumstances, I ended up there. And I went to this conference, and before I went up to see the clinic. And I saw what I believe to this day to be probably the most beautiful systemic work I have ever seen. And they got it. And I want to share with you a little description of what they did so that you can really feel the difference, okay? Now, usually when you're dealing with paralysis, which I'm not a doctor, I don't usually deal with paralysis, but you might have a physical therapist, and paralysis is very often features a frozen arm, it's tightly clenched and tight to the body, and so you might get treatment to that arm, and there would be massage, and there would be exercises, and they would try to open it, and sometimes they even strap a plank to the hand to make it open, and there's acupuncture, and there's all sorts of things. But I walked in this clinic, and what I saw was that there was a practitioner sitting with a patient, and the practitioner, I'm going to ask you to use your imagination, had a little wooden block about this size with a spiral carved in it, indented into the wood, okay? And the practitioner asked the patient to describe in words what it would feel like to run their finger around this spiral. Okay, now, what? But check it out. The different forms of cognition that requires, okay, it requires visual, it requires verbal, it requires relational, what am I supposed to say, what kind of answer are they looking for, it requires memory, it requires memory of tactile information. So there's all sorts of cognitive processes that are combining to do that. Okay, the key word is combining. Right? That's what's missing from that bicycle wheel, is the combining. They are combining these various forms of cognitive process to make a description. Then the practitioner took the person's hand that could still feel and moved it ever so slowly around the spiral, ever so slowly. And when they got to the end of the spiral, asked the person with the paralysis, not what did you feel? What was the difference? Okay? This is interesting, because if you ask what did you feel, that's going to be one type of description. What was the difference is going to be two types of description simultaneously. So you see what we're doing, we're combining cognitive processes. Now, these patients are walking out of there, but doctors and people who come in cannot understand what's happening. Because the way that each person responds and their process of making those combinings is completely unique to them. Their memories of when they touched a piece of wood, their memories of what it felt like to be right or wrong in relationship with the doctor, right? There's all kinds of stuff going on in that interaction. So this is one of thousands of exercises that they have. But what I want to say about this is that I started to really wonder, okay, I walk in, I see there's a problem, there's a paralysis. They come in and they start with this. What are they seeing that I'm not seeing? So I asked, okay, so what's the pathology? What for you is pathology? If it's not the paralysis, what is it? And so they said, this is fascinating. The pathology is the organism's inability to make sense of its world. So what they're doing is offering away an input so that those processes that are engaged in producing, making sense of the world, have a chance to reorganize, to relearn, to combine in new ways. They're not healing the patient. They're not making the patient like they were before. They're producing the conditions in which a trans-contextual mutual learning can take place. And so this is where I started to realize, okay, we're asking the wrong question. It's not how do systems get unstuck. The question is how do systems learn? That's the question. Okay, and if you start to ask that question, you very quickly end up in this trans-contextual territory that's super hard to keep track of. Right? When you learn how to play a violin, where is the learning? Is it in your muscles? Is it in the history of that instrument? Is it in the emotion that you feel with those tonalities? Is it in relationship to the teacher? Is it intellectual? Where's the learning? Well, it's in the combining, right? It's in the combining. But how do you get that? How do you measure that? How do you research that? Right? And so this is where I was like, well, we actually have a problem because we can't even talk about this kind of information. We need a new kind of information to even deal with this, because what we know of as data simply will not hold what we're doing here. Because from every direction you look, the information is changing. And it's completely different, and it's different from one minute to the next. And that is the information, right? When my dad coined this phrase, the difference that makes a difference. Are you guys familiar with that? A little bit, yeah. And the difference that makes a difference is what he called the smallest unit of information. And it's what it is when you can run your finger over something, subtle, like the paper ends, the metal begins. Okay, when you think you're looking at something that's still, but really your eyes are going like this. When a frog sees a fly, he doesn't actually get to see that fly till it moves. When you see colors, you don't see colors, you see colors in relationship to each other. So this thing of difference is allowing information in, but it's contrast, it's comparing, it's relational information. Always what we're doing as living organisms is perceiving relational information. So it's very weird that somehow we're in a world where we think we're not perceiving relational information, which is, in fact, relational information. Strange. It'll burst your head if you think too much about it. I mean, otherwise Prada bags wouldn't be worth anything, right? We are seeing relationships, just the wrong ones in terms of the survival of our species. But we are seeing them, yeah.
I know that it's, not that I'm an expert in this at all, but I know that in neurology, the hot thing at the moment is that we're actually living in a hallucination all the time. In fact, that what we think is the real world is actually generated by our brains. And all our senses really do is just update the model.
Yeah.
And if there's a difference,
There you go.
then the model gets updated. But otherwise, and that's how otherwise we're living in a hallucination of the world, and it more or less matches. But everybody's had that situation where you're looking for your keys and you can't find them, and eventually you find them there exactly the first place you looked. You think, how can that be? I actually already looked there. And in those moments, it seems more plausible that elves stole your keys and then replaced them, than that you just negatively hallucinated that they were not there.
Yeah.
That's the remarkable thing. The more ridiculous explanation suddenly becomes more plausible, because no, it can't possibly be that I just didn't see them because I was looking right there.
Right.
Yeah.
We are not perceiving the world. We're perceiving our perception of the world. And that's really, really important, because the second you start to do that, you can ironically perceive the world a little bit. But only in that way. So the difference that makes a difference, and if you have, does everyone have a pen? I'll just do a quick little experiment with you. Okay, if you take a pen in one hand and make a cup with your other hand. Okay, now let's just take a second and notice that cup. Just notice it. Okay, and now very gently put your pen in the cup and notice it again. And now, very slowly, keeping the cup there, take the pen out. And again, the emptiness. What's the difference? So there's information. Even when it looks like there's nothing there, the thing that happened is information. You're holding that information. Because this becomes critical. What do we do about information? How are we going to handle questions of research, how we exchange information, what's important in the information? And this is where I realized, okay, I'm just going to have to try to rethink what could be a new species of information. So that was where warm data came from. This is when warm data comes in, because we start to realize that we can't possibly really deal with information from that place. But first, let's do semathesy for a second. So this question of how do systems learn? Does it work? Boopity boop. Is it happening? 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Okay. Make it great again. Let's see. I don't know. It's bouncing around. Let me just put it in there. There. We got it now. So I realized that this concept of transcontextual mutual learning was actually really needed. That we had a hard time talking about what's happening in a system without being able to address the fact that it's in mutual learning, right? When we talked about the education system here, it's in a mutual learning process with all these other institutions and our culture and every one of our families and our experience and our history of what it is to be in school and the way we want our kids to repeat our own history, which is a really weird thing. But anyway, it's hard to stop that. Strange. So I made up this word because I just needed a way to talk about that without constantly going through the whole story that I just told you. So the preface is sim, and the word mathesy means learning, and the word is semathesy, which basically means learning together. And the idea is that a semathesy as a noun is an entity formed by transcontextual mutual learning through interaction. So I'm a semathesy, you're a semathesy, a school is a semathesy, a society is a semathesy, a tree, a forest, whatever. But whatever it is you're looking at, you're asking the question, how is it learning to be in its world? How is it learning to be in its world? And when you see that crooked tree in the forest and you think, how should we fix this crooked tree? Which is a weird thing to ask, but nevertheless, it's the kind of thing we do. You're going to come up with various questions, like how to undo the frozen arm, how to fix the education system, right? And immediately you're going to come in and try to fix the thing. If you ask the question, how is the tree learning to be in its world? Immediately your perception, your focus is shifted, your approach will change. And you start to see that the crookedness of the tree is actually an expression, it's a description of the mutual learning process of that organism in its contexts. How is that organism learning to be in that spot? Where does the shadow fall? Where does the wind blow? Where is the soil nutritious? Where are the worms happening? Where do the dogs pee? Where do the humans climb? Where do the, right? Where are the rocks that it's moving around? And another tree in the same forest might stand straight and tall. And you would think, how is that tree learning to be in its world? But in either case, you're asking a very different question, right? So I'm looking here at mutual learning as not necessarily something great, okay? Learning is not necessarily a good thing. You can learn to lie, you learn to be violent, you learn to withhold affection, you learn to live and die by the capitalist bell, okay? We're learning to be in our world. How are we learning to be in our world? How are we semathesizing the conditions that we live within? How are we semathesizing those pushes and contortions, those pinches that we live within, that we have to somehow move between? And we are crooked trees, right? So it's this word semathesy. You know, we've all had days like that. And we've known people who have lived lives like that. Okay, so how do you fix the tree? Well, that is the wrong question, isn't it? But if you ask, how is the tree learning to be in its world, then you have another question. How am I going to participate in that? How do I participate in that mutual learning? That's another whole thing to how do I facilitate it? How do I manipulate it? How do I manage it? How do I, right? I don't want to do any of those things. I want to give it room to learn to be in its world in another way and learn with it. My learning and the tree's learning are not separate. There are various criteria of semathesy, and I'm gonna go fast, okay? Sorry. You got the context part? Good. The next one is bias, and then stochastic process and boundaries and time and play. So I'm just gonna skip context, but you got that, right? Okay. Probably for me in my work in warm data, this image right here is the most important piece. If I were to make a logo for warm data hosts, it would be this box. And that box, some of you may recognize, is the box from the story The Little Prince, where the little prince says to the man, draw me a sheep. And the man draws a sheep and he says, that's a terrible sheep. And he draws another sheep and he says, why can't you draw a sheep? And then he makes a box and he says, your sheep's in the box. And he says, how did you know it's perfect? Okay, my work around warm data is not about classifying or describing or labeling or modeling anybody else's perception ever. What I'm interested in is how the mutual learning of their crooked tree is possible in the world. So my feeling is never mess with somebody's sheep in the box, but let the sheep in the box shift on its own. What can I do as a participant in the mutual learning process without messing with someone's sheep? How do I let that happen? Because if you start to tell people their sheep is wrong, you're seeing the wrong sheep. What do? They dig in and they're pretty sure that your sheep is wrong. So, or they believe you, which is worse, actually. That's probably much worse. So bias. Every one of us sees the world differently. The thing that I have noticed most with warm data has been that the perception of complexity, I'm getting bored of that word. It's really, now that McKinsey's using it, it's starting to be icky. I mean, why not just call it life, right? Seriously. But the perception of this transcontextual process, I can draw pictures of it on the board all day long. It doesn't matter until it's your memories, it's your life, it's your complexity. Your version of it is already rich with the details of your life, right? So that's really important. And your bias brings other possibilities and shows me my edges, right? The earthworm is going to earthworm. The tree is treeing, the birds are birding, everybody's got their thing. And they're all changing. So what's interesting is this way in which the combining is moving. The coalescing is shifting. The fluid patterning, not the pattern, but the fluid patterning. The patterns are changing. That's interesting. Difficult to talk about, though. Okay, so the bias is important. Stochastic process. So this, I mean, I don't know how anybody does anything without stochastic process at the center. So the word stochastic, do you know this word? It comes from math. It means kinda random. Not completely random, mostly random, but not entirely random, right? So these are my kids, for example, and as you can see, they are not puppies or piglets, right? There is something that has order here, but they are not me, okay? And if I had another one, which I'm never gonna, I have plenty, it would be nothing like the two of them, but something like them, okay? If you shoot an arrow, it goes generally in the direction you're going to shoot it, but the wind could blow, and this could happen, and that could happen. Life is in a stochastic process. The earthworm tomorrow is going to be an earthworm. The meadow is going to continue meadowing. But the way that it does that is not a straight line. It's going to respond to various events and happenings and shifts and movements and the responses of the responses of the responses of the responses. The thing is in motion. It's learning. All the organisms are learning to be in their world, and that is not a straight line. So we have boundaries between these organisms. And those boundaries, you have to be really careful with boundaries, because you can start to think that they're real. And boundaries are really interesting when you study them as interfaces of mutual learning. My skin is a boundary. It keeps the wet bits in and makes my conversation with you a little less gory, right? But is this the edge of me? Or are my ideas the edge of me? Is my family history the edge of me? How about my unborn grandchildren? How about my microbiome? So which boundary have you drawn? Right, and the thing is, it's useful to draw boundaries, but be careful because almost everybody almost always forgets they drew them. And they start to think, but this is the edge of the organization, is it? This is the edge of the individual, is it? This is the edge of the family, is it? So that question of where's the edge? Where's the edge of the crooked tree? The crooked tree is home to the bugs. The crooked tree is home to the birds. The crooked tree is in relationship to the soil and the water and the bacteria and the earth. Right, where's the edge? So when we are looking at boundaries, be very careful. When you start to get systems maps, oh man, I know you've seen them. And they look like this. You know? You have to really watch out because every one of these items that has been identified is identified arbitrarily. You drew the box. That's not the box. You drew it. It's your sheep. Right? And we forget that. So boundaries are interfaces of mutual learning. My skin receives and transmits information. Trump's wall between Mexico and the United States is an interface of mutual learning, baby. Both sides are learning an awful lot about that relationship and what's possible in the communication of that relationship. Right? So looking at interfaces as where mutual learning is taking place allows you to then think about, well, what's happening in the mutual learning? There's a whole school of family therapy developing around somaticity right now. Interestingly, particularly in Islamic communities, because they're looking at how the different relationships in the family become interfaces of mutual learning. And when they get the families to start describing those different interfaces, those boundaries of mutual learning, without the therapist doing anything, people start behaving differently. That's interesting. Boundaries. Time. One of the things about the models of systems that look like this is they never have time in them. Okay, this is a problem because all the organisms in a living system are always changing. They're always learning. Any time you're in communication, when we are exchanging, we're finding the limits of what's possible for us. And those limits are changing, right? So any communication plus time is learning. Any communication plus time is learning. And time moves in lots of different ways. There's lots of times. There's the time it takes to get well, and there's the time it takes to graduate from high school, and there's the time it takes to, to do your email, and there's the time it takes to tell a story. There's the time it takes to make love. There's the time it takes to fall in love. There's the time it takes to die. Right? These are not the same time. Time moves in really a whole different kind of way in every one of those stories. So just like you eat things that are salty and crunchy and spicy, and you walk down the street, you see things that are soft in texture, crunchy in texture, that are sharp in texture, so too time has this multiplicity of sensual processes in it. And the last thing is play. We're never going to make it through all three of these in 45 minutes. Play, of course, is everything. And I don't mean play as in, silly, playful with toys, although that's nice too. What I mean is play as in the possibility of perceiving differently. Play is when you are practicing what's at the edges of your perception. Play is when you start to be in a circumstance where, you look at a piece of art and you think, I can see that differently now. Play is the possibility zone. And play can be a tragedy, okay? Play doesn't have to be happy. Puppies play. And when they play, they're playing on multiple levels simultaneously. I have 3 puppies in my house right now, and they're constantly rolling around biting each other. My father talked about the bite that denotes the bite. They know that they're not biting. So they bite, and the bite says, this is a bite that's not a bite. Okay? It's things that stand for. It's the is not. It's that thing of a way of taking part in something that's not the something. There's this way of being in it and out of it. And that's how we shift. That's how we move. That's how we learn to be in our world in new ways. Okay, that was some mathy. Any questions? Great, we'll move on. Here's one thing that I want to start with. Can you see this? Okay. We're going into the warm data world. So, this word, interconnected, in my early days of working on this, whenever you said this word, people's eyes just glazed over. They were like, oh man, but I just have to go to work on Monday. Like, stop with the interconnected stuff. Now BP uses it in their commercials, right? So we've become accustomed to this word. And it's an interesting study in what happens when you bring new words in, because it got metabolized into the world it was living in. How are we learning to be in our world? Well, for a lot of people, when you say the word interconnected, there's something like this happening. And this is a big, big step from the linear progress, okay? This is big. This is big. But it's not alive. And that's a problem. And that is a really big difference, because when you look at something that's alive, now try not to get hung up on, can you see this grasshopper? The grasshopper is on a log with moss. Okay. Now, it should be that this and this could be describing the same kind of relationships. But we got a problem. All right? Because this thing, this is very soothing to the question of what are we going to do? If I think, what am I going to do? And I have that in front of me, I can push this and pull that, and I can label this and remove that, right? There's a way in to this. There's a way in which there's been an objectification and abstraction that invites a particular kind of approach of action. This is action without context. Okay, when I go like this and I ask, what are you going to do? Oh, I don't know. I'm not a cricket. I'm not the moss. I'm not the log. I'm not the jungle. What am I going to do? How do I participate in that? And that gripping feeling of, oh my God, I have no idea what she's talking about, that's really important. Because it's the difference in how we have learned to be in our world. We learned to be in this world. And now we have to learn to be in this world. And this is a huge shift of what you can do, how you can be, what action in context is so different than action without context. So this is why we need warm data. Okay, and now I'm going to go back. Here's our meadow. We're meadowing. The ecology of communication is something that I termed when I started to really start to ask a different kind of question here. So in the eugenics question, it's the question of how do you change the parts, right? You want to make systems change? How do you change the part? You got to fix the education system. We've got to design a new economy. We've got to redo the hospitals. We got to get our hands on politics and restructure democracy. We're going to fix the parts. Okay, and then you're like, yeah, but that's not where it is. We got to deal with the relationships. And so you start to think, okay, we're going to deal with these relationships. We've got to change the relationships. That's a little weird too. So then you start to think about it, and relationships are actually made of communication. So maybe what we need to do is change the communication. Okay? But then you get into some very weird situations, the likes of which we're seeing everywhere right now, where the change is visible because there's some new script that everybody has to know. But actually the thinking's all the same. We're just using different words, and we got a new script to talk about whatever it is, whether it's gender or economics or regenerative farming, or it's like whatever it is we're talking about. We have a new script for it. So changing the communication didn't change something very deep. So what you see in an ecology is not just all the organisms in interaction, but what you see is what it's possible to be in interaction. Okay? When we look at this meadow, we see all these organisms growing. But what's happening is that there is a possibility realm. Who's it possible for those plants to be? What's possible in those relationships? Okay, that's not the same as what are they doing. Do you see the difference? So my work here is this question not of how do you change the parts, or how do you change the relationships, or how do you change the communication, but how do you change what's possible in the communication? Because what's on the transcript is not what happened. If you look at the transcript, you're going to see what it was possible to say. Like, again, back to, just the average day in the office. Did you say this? Yeah. Why'd you say that? Because that's what it was possible for me to say. Right? You see a child that's in a family that's got abusive parents, and you're wondering why they didn't speak up. Hello. It wasn't possible. Right? So we are not just completely in the realm of full-on possibility all the time. We are in contextual limitations. Right? Why do we not just say, okay, there can be no more offshore accounts? Let's take that to Davos. No more offshore accounts, no more planned obsolescence. And they'll be like, you can't say that. Right? Or something, right? So you're in partnerships. You have friendships. The way you are in one friendship is not the way you are in another. Why? Because of what's possible to communicate. And those rules are not written anywhere, but they're everywhere. So what's possible in the ecology of communication is a way of also inviting the question of what are you bringing in? What is this thing that you say? What if it lands in the soil here? Is it composting? Is it blooming? Is it allowing something else to grow? Thinking about what's happening in our conversation not as a series of PowerPoints and podiums, but as a garden of what it is that, how can I fertilize and nourish the possibility for your communication? How can I make it possible for your complexity, your sheep in the box, to be in mutual learning with me? And that's a real shift from what is my development, right? That the individual, the self. Instead it's, wait, who can you be when you're with me? Who am I allowing you to be? That's a shift. Okay, so here we go. This is a transcontextual issue. And this word, you guys are troopers, by the way, melting, sitting here, watching me talk endlessly. Are you okay? Okay. My dad writes, let me coin the word transcontextual. This is his word. As a general term for this genus of syndromes. Incidentally, he's talking about the double bind here. It seems that both those whose life is enriched by transcontextual gifts and those who are impoverished by transcontextual confusions are alike in one respect. For them, there is always or often a double take, a falling leaf, the greeting of a friend, or a primrose by the river's brim is not just that and nothing more. Okay? Exogenous experience may be framed in the context of dream, and internal thought may be projected into the context of the external world, and so on. For all this, we seek a partial explanation in learning and experience. If you see somebody waving across the street, it's not just that and nothing more. Okay? The wave that happens here is not the same as the wave that happens in California. There's something has Danishized it, right? The wave of a friend who really loves and misses you is something super different than the one who is actually really pissed off because you slept with their partner, but they still have to say hello, right? The wave, the greeting is not just that and nothing more. There's lots of different messages and meta messages in the communication. Lots of things are happening. A falling leaf could just be a leaf that's falling from a tree. But you might see it at the very moment that you're thinking a thought of someone you miss, a grandparent that has died or something. It could be there's a kid in the tree. It could be that there's a drought and the tree isn't getting what it needs and it's telling you about ecological destruction. It could be a metaphor of a melancholy moment. It's not just that and nothing more. Okay, so what we think is being communicated is one tiny fraction of what's happening in the communication, which is why having these streams of data is useless. Because what's happening in the combining is this transcontextual stuff with layers and layers and overturnings and combinings of all this deep stuff. And, you know, I show up to an ecological conference on global warming and I have to go to the shop and buy a new dress suit to present in. And the suit's made by slaves somewhere. Right? And I have to do that because my identity is being perceived culturally. Do you see what I'm saying? The problem is not that we have particulate in the atmosphere. The problem is that our identities are being measured by each other through material and status positions. Because there is this transcontextual process going on. So if we can make a big net and pull all the particulate out of the sky, but we're going to put it right back up there again. Because what it takes to be in relationship with each other is moving in very different ways. You know, you can teach people to use the language of gender equality or anti-racism, but you didn't make them able to actually perceive that way. So the transcontextualness of this is it's really deep. And if we overlook it, we do so at our peril. There's a lot more information than you think going on. How do you know when to tell someone you love them? Is it because you went on 5 dates? It's always 5. I don't know why, but it always is. You went out for 5 months? No. I mean, if you decided on those bases, it's a pretty good chance that you missed your moment. Right? So we are constantly perceiving warm data. Constantly. But if we don't make a space for it, then all you get is what was on the transcript. What you can actually point to, what you can look at, measure, right? But interesting phenomena occur when 2 or more rhythmic patterns are combined, and these phenomena illustrate very aptly the enrichment of information that occurs when one description is combined with another. And if you start to describe your childhood and education through the economic system, through the health system, you will start to see that you are living in a very transcontextual swirl. Very. So what are we going to do about this? So warm data can be defined as information that is alive. Okay, so my feeling is I don't know how in the world we're going to respond to a living world if the information we're using is frozen and reduced and not able to shift and move and be alive. So the information has to be alive too, and that's very uncomfortable. I'm so sorry. Because we're not used to information that's alive. We're used to it being something static, something you can point to, something you can refer to. Right? In the 1600s, we had the scientific methodology come in, and it was the first damn rule. You have to be able to measure it. You have to be able to define it. You have to be able to do the same experiment and get the same results in 2 different places. And that was fantastic. It got the church and it got the king out of the ideas that needed to change. It was necessary. But it is also a problem because living systems change and learn and move. And now we are stuck in a world where we've become accustomed to defining and labeling all the members of a family, all the aspects of a culture, all the aspects of a forest. And we are no longer able to see how an acorn becomes a crooked tree in relationship to how many millions of stories of other organisms. Right? That tree is not the story of the tree. It's the story of the stories of millions of organisms over millions of years coming into that expression in that moment. So warm data is information that's alive, or transcontextual information about the interrelationships that integrate a complex system. You can use either one. Take your pick. Okay. I'm just going to say this one last thing, and then we have to take a break, or we will actually die. And this, you have to take time to get, okay? This is one of those pieces in life that came a long time ago. And Charles Saunders Peirce talked about abductive process. This is a part of systems theory that nobody wants to talk about. This is the troubling cousin that doesn't show up at Christmas, okay? This is the one that is the problem. Now, I'm going to give you my particular way of describing this, which I think is soft and friendly and loving, okay? Because if you go searching this on the internet, God help you, you will not find what you're looking for. You might find this stuff on Peirce. Okay, so Peirce talks about how we learn something over here, and then you can take that learning, and when you're over here, you can make a hypothesis based on that. Okay, and he's really interested in this idea of the hypothesis, because it's the learning, but it's been moved out of the context you got it, and it's over here. And so what he says is that the hypothesis is how the new gets in. Because you're using this hypothesis to discover this new thing and to make sense of it, but it's definitely not right. It's just a hypothesis, right? So there's play. We were just talking about play. There's play in the hypothesis. But also, the hypothesis shows you what you learned, right? Okay, so then my dad comes along, and he's like, yeah, this is really good, but he shifts it a little bit. And he talks about abductive process as being learning something in one context, and then noticing how that context becomes a description of the next context. I hear a piece of gamelan music for the first time. I'm not accustomed to gamelan music. I hear in the music what I have heard before. I describe the gamelan through my existing understandings. Okay? So I learned to fill out a form in kindergarten, and I learned that the system wants my name, my birthday, my this, my that. I'm learning to be in my world. Okay, you see the connection? I'm learning to be in my world. And then I'm in another context, and they start asking me questions. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm at immigration. Here's my name, here's my birthday, here's my, right? They don't really want to know what I dreamed last night. They don't want to know what size shoe I wear. Like, I've worked it out. This is a description of that. Okay, now when we look at this in the biological world, it's fantastic. And this will blow your mind before you take a break. These organisms, okay, check it out. They are in physiological description, okay, not of their predators, but of the predators of the animals that would eat them. Okay, this is not a first order solution, my friends. This is not the education system is broken, let's fix the education system. This is the natural, the biological world showing us how abductive process is what, that's just the stupid word for it. These creatures are describing second order contextual relationships through their physiology. All right? Now, if you start to think about the ways in which we are abducting the experiences of our lives and the experiences we have in school, start to make sense of the experience of what an economy is, make sense of the experience of what a mother-in-law or a, right? And we're using all of these things to make sense of each other. It's like being in a giant house of mirrors, and all of the experiences are explaining and describing each other. So where this wants to go, I mean, check this out. I just love these pictures, right? So this gecko is describing his tree, right? This froggy, can you see him? This froggy is describing the forest floor, but not just the forest floor as it decays. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. The stick bug is a description of the tree. Or is the tree a description of the stick bug? The fox? Do you see his little eyes? Where's the edge of the fox? Where's the edge of the stick bug? Where's the edge of the frog? What is systems change? This is why we have to work in the space where abductive process is actually forming, where mutual learning through abductive process is taking place, and allow new forms, new sheep to come in the box. Because you can't grab it anywhere and make it change. So this is where the process we're going to do after your break, you'll start to see how this is coming alive in that. But there is this fantastic world of possibility that's right there. It's just that it's nowhere we're used to working. It's nowhere we're used to tending. It's a completely foreign, whose responsibility is the abductive process? So it's a tender place where life is actually generating more life. It's lifing there. That's where the regenerative process is. That's where the evolution is happening. That's where the new comes from. It's where the changes are. It's just that it's not where we're used to looking. And it's really uncomfortable. But it's also fantastic because it's wide open. So take a break and we'll come back.
15 minutes. Let's give Nora a hand right now.